A house rises from the gray water of a New England lake. 4 stories of pale Italianate stone, 2 corner towers, and above them all a glass and iron dome, 80 feet tall, curved like an upside-down pear, catching the last of the October light through 316 empty brass cages. The wind comes off the water with teeth. At the foot of the granite steps, a young woman sits on a cracked leather suitcase. 22, red hands, tangled hair, a wool coat that does not belong to her full of pockets that will soon be full of things she was warned never to find. She does not yet know that. She knows only that she has 1 hour and 45 minutes. Down the long driveway, a black sedan pulls through the iron gate. A polished shoe touches gravel. A wristwatch catches the light. A man in a charcoal suit climbs the porch behind her, smiling the smile of a man about to drown something. And inside the house, under the conservatory floor, a door that has been locked for 50 years begins to remember its key. In 2 hours, Magdalene Crowder would lose the only home she had ever known. In 1 hour and 45 minutes, she would open a door her grandmother had made her swear every birthday for 13 years never to touch. She did not yet know that. She knew only that the October wind off Hollowmere Lake had teeth. Magdalene Crowder sat on a cracked leather suitcase at the foot of the stone steps. She was 22 years old. She was an art history major in her final semester at UMass. She had no parents, no siblings, no grandparents. Her hands were red. Her hair was tangled. Her eyes hadn't blinked in maybe 5 minutes. Behind her, the house breathed. Not breathed. Loomed. Pressed down on her shoulders like a weight she couldn't name. The Hollowmere Aviary. That was what people in town called it. The aviary. Like it was a stranger and not the only home she had ever known. 4 stories of Italianate stone the color of bone in winter. 2 octagonal corner towers. Black iron cresting along the roof line, sharp as fish hooks against the gray sky. And rising from the middle of the house, the thing that made tourists slow their cars on Route 7, the dome. A glass and iron dome, 80 feet tall, curved like an upside-down pear. Built in 1882 by a man who wanted his wife to live among songbirds. Inside that dome, 316 brass cages still hung from the rafters. Empty. Furred over with creeping ivy that had eaten through the broken panes and slithered down into the parlor like something alive. Maddie had counted those cages once. She was 7. Her grandmother had let her climb the iron staircase that wound up through the dome's interior. Just that once. "Why are they empty, Gran?" she had asked. Winona had not answered. Winona never answered the questions that mattered. And now Winona was dead. 4 months in the ground. The cancer ate her in 9 weeks. Faster than a tax bill. Faster than a funeral could be planned. She checked her watch. 10:15. No house as of 1 hour and 45 minutes from now. "Miss Crowder?" The voice came from the porch. Smooth. Boston. The kind of voice that had practiced sympathy in front of a mirror. She didn't look up. Thaddeus Ashcroft III stood at the top of the granite steps in a charcoal suit that cost more than her tuition. His shoes were Italian. His watch was Patek Philippe. His smile was the smile a man puts on when he is about to drown a kitten and call it mercy. "Miss Crowder, I need you off the property by noon. The locksmith is en route." She still didn't look at him. "It's 10:15, Mr. Ashcroft." "It is." "Then I have until noon." "You have until noon to be off the property, which means at 11:30 I expect to see you walking down that driveway. Not sitting, not lingering." She finally tilted her head, slow, like a cat deciding whether to bother. "Are you escorting me out personally, sir, or did you bring help?" He smiled wider, the smile of a man enjoying the part of the job he was supposed to dread. "Officer Ainsworth is in her cruiser for your safety." For her safety. That was rich. The cruiser sat just inside the wrought iron gate exhaust curling in the cold. The young deputy inside hadn't gotten out yet, hadn't even looked up. as if she didn't want to be a part of this, as if she was waiting for someone to tell her she wasn't. Maddie went back to staring at her hands. So, here was where Crowder women died. Not in the house, not exactly, but here, on stone steps, in rooms that had outlived them. Imogen had died in the parlor in 1989. Winona had died upstairs in the east bedroom 4 months ago. Vera, no. Don't. Don't think about Vera. She closed her eyes. Vera. Mother. The word didn't belong in the same mouth as the woman who had lifted her from the wreckage of a state highway when she was 9. April 2013. Black ice. A pickup truck that came around the bend too fast and a Subaru that didn't have time to swerve. Daddy gone. Mama gone. The first responders had said it was instant. They had used that word like it was a kindness. Instant. As if speed could replace breath. Winona had driven to the hospital in her bathrobe. The next morning she had handed Maddie a glass of orange juice and said, "You'll live with me now. You will be loved. Now finish your juice." That was Winona, love expressed as instruction. For 13 years, the aviary had been the world. The lake, the dome, the cages, the marble Athena in the reading room, the smell of old books and lemon polish, and the particular cold that never left the lower halls no matter how high the boiler ran. Winona had been quiet about the past. Imogen had been a name on a portrait. Vera had been a photograph on the mantle that Winona dusted but never spoke of. The Crowder women Maddie had decided long ago were a tribe of withholders. She had loved them anyway, and now the last of them was 4 months in the ground, and a man in Italian shoes was telling her she had 2 hours before her life ended. 2 hours. Miss Crowder. She opened her eyes. Thad had taken one step down. Just one. Like a chess piece advancing. "You should know," he said gentler now, "that I am sorry about your grandmother. Truly, I knew her." "You knew her." "I visited." "You visited." "In her final months. We had business." Maddie's stomach dropped 4 floors. "What business?" "The mortgage, dear." He said it like it was a recipe. Dear. The mortgage, dear. As if calling her dear could put gauze on the wound. She stood up, slow, her knees popped. She had been sitting on that suitcase for 38 minutes. Her body was 22, but it felt like 110. "You visited my grandmother while she was dying." "I visited about the loan while she was dying." "It was already in default, Miss Crowder. We were trying to find solutions." "You found a solution." He didn't answer. She looked past him then, past the porch, past the cracked oak door with its tarnished brass knocker shaped like a wren, past the dome rising above it all, gone slate gray in the cloud light, its 316 brass cages stirring slightly in the wind. The dome, the cages, the reading room, the east bedroom, the basement. The basement Winona had warned her about every single year on Maddie's birthday like a vow. "Never the cellar, sweetheart. Whatever happens, promise me." Maddie had promised. Of course she had promised. The basement was just a door beneath the conservatory floor. A copper-banded door behind the hanging fronds where ivy had grown thick enough to swallow it. Maddie had not seen that door since she was 16, and Winona had caught her looking and slapped her hand. Slapped it, hard enough to leave a red mark for an hour. "Promise me, Maggie, not the cellar, never the cellar." "Promise me, promise me." Maddie picked up her suitcase. "I left some photographs in the reading room," she told Thad. "Mind if I get them?" He looked at his watch, the Patek Philippe. "You have 1 hour and 43 minutes. Don't take all of it." "I won't." She walked past him. She did not look back. Inside the house was already a corpse. Furniture gone. Rugs rolled and removed. Drapes down. The walls were the color of dried tea and pocked with rectangular ghosts, where paintings had hung for 90 years. The Crowder oil portraits Imogen at 30 in a high collar, Winona at 26 with a baby in her arms. Vera at 16 in a graduation gown gone. Sold. Auctioned 3 weeks ago to pay the lawyers Maddie couldn't afford to keep paying. Her footsteps echoed. The reading room was at the end of the long west hall. A small room, 2 windows, walnut shelves climbing to the ceiling. The marble Athena on her plinth in the corner, her sightless eyes turned toward the lake. The plinth. Maddie stopped in the doorway. She had not come here for photographs. There were no photographs. There hadn't been photographs in this room since before her parents died. She had come for the plinth. She closed the door behind her, locked it. The brass tumblers clicked softly. The sound was small but felt enormous. She set the suitcase down. She approached the Athena. 3 days ago, while sorting through Winona's effects, Maddie had found an envelope at the bottom of a hat box. The envelope was sealed with red wax. The wax had a crest pressed into it, a wren in flight. Winona's signet ring. The ring Winona had been buried in. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper. Maddie had read it twice and then locked it in her glove compartment. She had not been able to read it a third time. Not yet. Now she pulled it from her coat pocket. Her hands were shaking. The paper was thin, onion skin, the kind of paper old women still bought from stationery shops because the new paper felt wrong against their fingers. Winona's handwriting was tight and elegant and slightly slanted to the right. Maggie, my heart, I am writing this in the hospice. The nurses give me something for the pain at 8 and again at midnight. Between, I think. I think a great deal. I have lied to you. Not in the small ways that mothers and grandmothers lie. In a large way. A very large way. And I am going to die without making it right unless you make it right for me. You will hear in the months after I am gone things about our family. About Imogen. About money in the foundations of this town that does not belong to the men who hold it. You will hear that your great-grandmother was a wicked woman, that she helped a wicked man do wicked things during the Depression. That is the lie I want you to undo. Imogen was not wicked. I was the coward, not her. She left me a key and I never turned it. I let the house rot around me and the truth rot under it because I was afraid of what would happen to you if I opened that door. I am not afraid anymore. I am dying, and the dying have nothing to fear from the living. The key is in the Athena. Lift her right hand. The plinth is hollow. There is a brass key inside. The key opens the small copper-banded door beneath the conservatory's iron staircase. Past the ivy. The ivy hides it now. I have not touched that ivy in 50 years. Go down, my heart. Go down and learn what Imogen kept. And then, and this is the part I am begging you for, do not be like me. Do not be quiet about it. The Crowder women have been quiet for 4 generations. We have made an art of silence. It has not protected us. It has only buried us. Be loud, Maggie. Be loud enough for all of us. I loved you the way I should have loved your mother. I am sorry I did not love her louder. Yours always. Grand Maddie sat down on the floor. The letter fell from her hand. She picked it up. She read the last paragraph again. I am sorry I did not love her louder. Vera. Her mother. What did that mean? What was that? What? The clock on the mantel ticked. The clock had not been wound in 2 months and it ticked anyway. Maddie had stopped trying to understand the house. She stood up. She approached the Athena. The marble was cold under her palm. The goddess looked away. Always looked away. Maddie reached for the right arm, the one extended outward palm up as if offering something invisible. She gripped the wrist. She pulled. It moved. Not far, maybe an inch, but it moved. The plinth made a sound, a soft sliding sound. A click. The top panel of the plinth shifted. Maddie's heart was a fist in her throat. She slid the panel aside. Inside the hollow plinth was a small velvet pouch, dark green. The drawstring frayed. She lifted it out. It was heavy, heavier than it should have been. She loosened the string. A brass key fell into her palm. It was not a modern key. It was an old skeleton key, the kind that opened cabinets in museums. The bow was shaped like a wren in flight, the same wren as the wax seal. Maddie's mouth went dry. 50 years, Winona had said. The ivy. 50 years. 2 generations of Crowder women had stood in this room holding this key and put it back. Now Maddie held it, and she was not going to put it back. She slipped the key into her coat pocket. She crossed the room, unlocked the door, stepped out into the hall. She listened. Thad was on the porch. She could hear him on a phone call. His voice clipped and impatient. Something about contractors. Something about a 1 o'clock window. Her time was bleeding away. She walked fast and quiet down the West Hall, past the empty drawing room, past the dining room where she had eaten Christmas dinners with Winona for 13 years, past the staircase to the second floor, to the conservatory. The conservatory was the heart of the house, the reason the house existed. A circular room 50 feet across with a marble floor inlaid in concentric rings of green serpentine and white Carrara. Above it, the iron and glass dome rose 80 feet, supported by 12 curving iron ribs that met at an oculus of frosted glass. And inside the dome, hanging in clusters from every rib, were the cages, 316 brass cages. They hung at every height. Small wire and brass songbird cages, fist-sized, dangling from silk cords gone gray with age. Larger parlor cages with dome tops and porcelain feeders, the porcelain cracked. 3 enormous Victorian breeding cages the size of refrigerators, suspended by iron chains, their wire so corroded it had begun to flake to the floor in copper-colored snow. And throughout all of them, threading through the bars and curling around the chains and dripping down from the broken glass panels overhead, the ivy. The ivy had won. 60 years of unchecked English ivy had climbed in through the dome's broken panes and embraced every cage, every chain, every iron rib, until the conservatory looked like a green cathedral grown over the bones of an aviary. Maddie stood in the doorway. She breathed in. The conservatory smelled like wet earth and copper and something else, something faintly sweet like a flower that had given up. She had not been allowed in here, not since she was 16, not since the slap. She crossed the threshold. The marble was slick. Lichen had grown into the seams. A pigeon's nest sat broken near the south wall. The iron staircase that wound up to the dome's interior was at the room's center. A spiral, wrought iron, painted black once, now mostly rust. But Maddie was not going up. She was going under. She moved around the staircase's base. The bottom step rested on a small marble platform, and just beyond the platform, against the conservatory wall, was the place where the ivy grew thickest. She crouched. She reached into the ivy. Her fingers found cold metal, copper bands, a door. Her breath caught. Winona had said past the ivy. The ivy hides it now. The ivy hid it. Maddie pulled at the vines. They came away in tangles, releasing the smell of crushed leaves and decades of secrecy. Her hands turned green. A spider scurried up her sleeve and she didn't flinch. She didn't have flinch left in her. The door emerged. It was 3 feet high, 2 feet wide, built into the conservatory's stone foundation. The door itself was oak banded in copper that had gone the color of old pennies. A heavy iron lock plate, an old keyhole. No knob, just a recessed copper ring set into the wood, the kind you'd pull to open. She drew the brass key from her pocket. She slid it into the lock. For a moment, nothing. She turned it harder. The lock screamed. Not metaphorically. The internal pins, frozen with 60 years of disuse, fought her with a sound like a small animal in pain. Maddie braced her weight against the door and turned with both hands and felt something inside the lock snap forward and the door give a heavy, exhausted click. She pulled the copper ring. The door swung outward. A wave of air rose to meet her. Cold air. old air. The kind of air that had been breathing alone in the dark for half a century untouched, waiting. It smelled like ink, like wet stone, like a library that had been forgotten in a basement of a museum nobody visited anymore. She looked into the dark, a narrow shaft, a staircase, spiraling down. The steps were copper, too, not iron copper, gone soft green-blue with verdigris. She didn't have a flashlight. She had her phone. She turned on the light. The beam shook in her hand. Maddie Crowder, 22 years old, art history major, orphan evictee, took the first step. The copper made a hollow sound under her boot. She took the second. She took the third. She closed the door behind her, but not all the way. She left it open 3 inches, because she was not stupid. The staircase spiraled tightly. 18 steps. She counted. She always counted. It was a thing Winona had taught her: count when you are afraid, and the counting will hold you. At the bottom, the shaft opened. Maddie raised her phone. She stopped breathing. The room was a circle. Not a basement. Not a cellar. Not a utility space. A circle. 30 feet across, perfectly round, with a high vaulted ceiling that arched up into a shallow dome of carefully laid brick. As if someone had taken the conservatory above and built its mirror image in stone underground. The walls were poured concrete 2 feet thick. She could see the seams. The floor was flagstone smooth from sweeping. Iron sconces had been mortared into the walls at intervals. Electric, not gas. Someone had wired this room for power, and a frayed cable still snaked down from a junction box near the ceiling. Along the perimeter of the room sat the things she had been told never to see. Wooden crates, 40 of them, maybe more, stacked 4 high in some places. Each one banded in iron, each one stamped with serial numbers in faded black ink. 3 iron safes, massive, die-bold. The kind banks used in 1925, with brass dials the size of dinner plates and decorative gold scrollwork on the doors. A long oak desk, a leather chair, an adding machine, the old kind with a hand crank, a library lamp with a green glass shade, and on the desk in the precise center, a single leather-bound book. Maddie stepped into the room. Her phone beam caught the dust in the air. It moved like underwater snow. She walked to the desk. The book was thick, 12 inches square, bound in oxblood leather that had cracked along the spine. The cover was unmarked except for a small embossed shape gone soft with handling. A wren in flight, of course. She opened it. The first page was handwritten. The ink was sepia, and the hand was unmistakably feminine and steady and old. The first line read November 14th, 1932. Foreclosure transfer, 814 Elm Street. Paid $400 to B. Ashcroft to expedite eviction. Deed transferred to dummy corporation. Family removed. Profit secured. Maddie's vision tunneled. She read again. B. Ashcroft. She turned the page. Another entry. Another name. Another address. Another sum. Another family removed. Another deed transferred to a corporation that didn't exist, signed off by a man whose initials were B. Ashcroft. She turned and turned and turned. By the time she had read 50 pages, her hands were shaking so hard the phone light wobbled. By the time she had read 100, she had counted 24 families, 24 homes, 24 foreclosures, every one of them coerced, every one of them documented in Imogen Crowder's neat sepia hand, and every single one signed off by B. Ashcroft. Beauregard Ashcroft, Sr., founder of Berkshire Heritage Trust, grandfather of the man standing on her porch. Maddie sat down in the leather chair. She did not feel her body sit. The chair received her, and her body obeyed gravity, and she was somewhere else entirely, somewhere about 100 years away. She turned another page. This one had a bookmark, a pressed flower, a wren orchid, strange, rare, hard to find in New England, flattened and gone the color of weak tea. Beneath it, taped to the page with old yellow cellophane, was a contract. Maddie read the contract. She read it twice. I, Beauregard Ashcroft, do hereby acknowledge that the deeds to 24 residential properties within Berkshire County are held in trust by Imogen Crowder. In exchange for her silence regarding the origin of the funds, the property known as the Hollomere Aviary shall remain in her family's possession in perpetuity, immune from bank seizure, backed by the collateral held within her vault. So sworn this 15th day of March 1933. Two signatures, Imogen Crowder, Beauregard Ashcroft. Maddie put the book down. She pressed her hands against her face. The house was not hers because it had been bought. The house had been hers because her great-grandmother had been holding evidence over a man's throat for 90 years, and the contract said so. And Thaddeus Ashcroft III, currently pacing on her porch, was foreclosing on the only property his family's blood oath had sworn would never be foreclosed on. He knew. He had to know. That was why he had come himself. That was why a regional vice president of a bank was personally evicting a 22-year-old orphan from a falling-down house in October. He wasn't here to repossess the house. He was here to clean up. Maddie stood. She turned toward the crates. She crossed the room, grabbed an iron rod from the wall. There was an iron rod leaning casually near the safes, as if Imogen had always known someone would eventually need it, and she wedged the rod under the lid of the nearest crate. She pushed. The wood splintered. The iron band snapped. The lid lifted. Inside the crate were canvas bags, stiff, heavy, stamped in faded ink, Federal Reserve Bank of Boston, 1933. She pulled one out. She untied the cord. She tipped the bag toward her phone light. Treasury bonds, bearer bonds, engraved in blue and gold. $10,000 each, stacks and stacks of them, each bundle wrapped in a paper sleeve labeled in Imogen's hand. Bearer bonds. Maddie had taken a single semester of economics. She remembered enough. Bearer bonds were paper that paid whoever held it. No name, no registration. Whoever physically possessed the paper owned the value. The federal government had stopped issuing them in 1982. They were ghosts. Untraceable, untaxable, almost impossible to verify, and almost impossible to deny. Worth at face value $10,000 each. Worth with 90 years of compounded interest. She didn't know. But this crate alone, this one crate held maybe 100 bonds. And there were 40 crates. 40. She set the bag down. She turned away from it. Money was not what she had come for. She walked along the wall, the phone light tracing crate after crate, until she reached the back of the chamber. In the far corner, set apart from the others, was a smaller box. It was not iron-banded. It was rosewood, polished, maybe 12 inches by 18. A small brass plate on the lid was engraved with a single word, Vera. Maddie's stomach turned to water. She knelt. She lifted the lid. The box was full of notebooks, 6 of them, spiral-bound. The cheap kind with cardboard covers in pale colors, sky blue, mint green, daffodil yellow. The kind of notebooks a graduate student might buy at a drugstore for $1 each. On the cover of each, in Vera Crowder Penberthy's looping handwriting, was a year, 2013. Maddie's hand froze. 2013. The year her parents died. She lifted that notebook out of the box. It was thin, less than half filled. She opened it. The last entry was dated April 12, 2013, 6 days before the accident. Vera's handwriting was beautiful. Maddie had forgotten that. She had spent 13 years forgetting things about her mother. The looping V at the beginning of every page. The way Vera dotted her I's with a slight tail, as if she were always already moving on to the next word. Maddie read, I met with B. Ashcroft Jr. today at the bank. He was perfectly civil. He offered me coffee. I have been offered a lot of coffee by a lot of dangerous men in the last 6 months, and I am beginning to think coffee is the language they use when they have run out of better lies. I told him I knew about the bonds. I told him I knew about Imogen's vault. I told him I would be filing with the SEC in May. He did not blink. He said, Mrs. Penberthy, I would urge caution. There are a great many people in this town whose lives would be diminished by what you intend, including, I might add, your own. I said, is that a threat, Mr. Ashcroft? He said, it is a courtesy. I came home and I cried for an hour in the car before going inside. Maddie does not need to see me cry. She is 9. She does not need this. I will continue. If anything happens to me, the documentation is in the Rosewood box. Imogen's box, the third notebook from the bottom. There is a flash drive taped to the inside cover of 2012. There is a second copy with Attorney Elliott of Hartford, but he will not release it without the password, and the password is the date Maddie was born backwards. If you are reading this, my daughter, then I am not there. And I am so sorry. Mama. Maddie made a sound. It was not a word. It was not a cry. It was a small involuntary noise from somewhere in her chest. The noise a thing makes when it understands a thing it has not been allowed to understand. April 12th. Her mother had written this entry on April 12th, 2013. Her parents had died on April 18th, 2013. 6 days. Black ice, the police had said. A pickup truck around the bend too fast. A Subaru that didn't have time to swerve. An accident. That had been the official word. An accident. Maddie pressed both hands against the cover of the notebook. She closed her eyes. She made herself breathe. In, hold, out. Winona had known. That was the part that landed last and hardest. Winona had known. For 13 years, while she made lunches and braided Maddie's hair and signed permission slips and helped her study for the SATs. Winona had known her son-in-law and her only daughter had not died in an accident, and Winona had not told. Be loud, Maggie. The letter had said, be loud enough for all of us. Maddie understood the letter now. She understood why the ivy. She understood why the slap when she was 16 in this very room. She understood her grandmother. She forgave her grandmother. Not completely, but enough to keep going. Forgiveness. Maddie was learning did not have to be complete to be useful. She put the notebook down. She lifted the 2012 notebook. The inside cover had a manila envelope taped to it. Inside the envelope was a flash drive, small and silver, with a tiny piece of masking tape on the side. On the tape in her mother's handwriting, for Maddie, when you are old enough. She slid the drive into her pocket. She stacked the notebooks. She put them into the inner pocket of her coat. The coat was an enormous wool thing that had once belonged to Winona, gone too long in the sleeves, gone too wide in the shoulders, full of pockets, a woman of Winona's generation considered necessary. The notebooks fit. She stood up. Above her, somewhere in the world that contained porches and bank vice presidents in Italian shoes, footsteps, heavy, deliberate, approaching from the conservatory. Thad. He had come inside. She heard him calling, Miss Crowder? His voice was casual, light, almost concerned. Miss Crowder, where are you, dear? That dear again. Maddie did not move. She listened. She heard him cross the conservatory. She heard him stop. She heard him notice the ivy that had been pulled back, the door that stood 3 inches ajar. She heard him say very softly in the tone of a man who had just discovered something he had been afraid of his entire life. Oh. A single syllable. Oh. He knew. He had always known. The cellar, the basement, whatever he had called it in the conversations she had not been allowed to hear with her dying grandmother, he had known what was down here. Or at least he had known there was a here. She heard him take a breath. She heard him take a step. The first step on the copper staircase made the same hollow sound her boot had made. Miss Crowder, he called down. His voice was different now, not light, not casual. The smile was gone from his voice the way smiles disappeared from photographs after the shutter clicked. I'm coming down to discuss this with you. Stay where you are. Stay where you are. Maddie looked around the room. The crates, the safes, the desk, the notebooks, the bonds, the contract pressed beside a wren orchid. She could not take it with her, not all of it. There was no way. But she had the ledger, she had the notebooks, she had the flash drive. She had her mother's last words. She looked across the room. In the far wall, mostly hidden behind a stack of crates and a curtain of burlap that someone had nailed across a recessed section of concrete, was a door. A different door. Heavy. Steel. Painted the same color as the concrete so it would not be noticed at first glance. A horizontal push bar across its middle, the kind of bar you found on industrial fire exits in old buildings. A tunnel. Of course there was a tunnel. Imogen had built this room. Imogen had built everything. A woman who had documented 24 families' worth of evidence against a banker who had taken her town hostage was not a woman who built only one exit. Maddie picked up the leather ledger. She crossed the room. Behind her, the copper steps creaked. Thad was halfway down. She had perhaps 90 seconds. She reached the steel door. She pressed her body against the push bar. It gave. The bar groaned. The door eased outward into a black, brick-lined corridor that breathed out cold air and wet stone and a faint, faint smell of the lake. She slipped through. She pulled the door closed behind her. She heard from inside the chamber Thad's voice rising. "Miss Crowder." A pause. "Miss Crowder, where are you?" Another pause. Then a sound she would remember for the rest of her life. Thad had reached the bottom of the staircase. He had seen the room. He had seen what Imogen had built. He made a sound. It was the sound a man makes when his inheritance, his legacy, and his future collapse simultaneously in a single moment of unwelcome arithmetic. It was a small, wet, furious laugh. Then quietly, almost to himself, he said, "Oh, Imogen, you magnificent witch." Maddie did not stay to hear the rest. She turned in the dark. The tunnel stretched ahead of her, narrow and brick-walled, sloping gently downward. 90 years ago, during the height of Prohibition, this tunnel had been used to move bootleg whiskey under the Berkshire Hills. Tonight it would be used to move a 22-year-old woman and her great-grandmother's evidence away from the man whose family had taken her mother. The ledger pressed against her ribs. The flash drive sat warm in her pocket. The notebooks, 6 of them, ran in a small, reassuring weight along her side. She put one hand on the brick wall to steady herself. She walked. And as she walked, her grandmother's last sentence ran in her head like a song that had finally found its melody. "Be loud, Maggie. Be loud enough for all of us." Somewhere above her, in the empty husk of the aviary, Thaddeus Ashcroft III was making a phone call. She could not hear the words. She could hear only the urgency. The tunnel turned. The brick gave way to stone. The slope became a stairway. Maddie climbed without thinking, the way an animal climbs when it has finally decided not to die in the trap. At the top, a rusted iron grate, daylight bleeding through in thin gold lines. She set her shoulder against it. She pushed. The grate gave with a screech. She crawled out into an overgrown thicket at the edge of an abandoned trolley, right of way 3 blocks from the lake, half a mile from anything Thad would think to look. The October wind found her again. It was colder out here than it had been on the porch. She stood up. She brushed the dirt off her knees. She checked her watch. 11:04. She had 56 minutes before her noon deadline. She no longer cared about the deadline. She had a great deal more than a deadline to attend to. Maddie Crowder pulled her grandmother's enormous wool coat tighter around her shoulders, tucked the ledger more firmly against her ribs, and began to walk toward the only person in town she could think of who might still know how the older world had worked. A name she had heard exactly once as a child. A woman Winona had mentioned only in passing. A neighbor? A cousin, maybe. A woman named Lillian Whitcomb. The trolley right-of-way ran behind a strip of forgotten storefronts on Lake Street. Maddie kept her head down. Her grandmother's coat was the only thing keeping her upright, and she knew that if she stopped walking, she would not start again. She did not stop walking. The address she needed was 3 blocks east. She had been to the house once when she was 8. Winona had brought her along to deliver a jar of honey. The honey had been wrapped in a napkin. The napkin had been embroidered with a wren. Winona had let Maddie carry it the whole way and had told her to be careful and had said very quietly on the porch as they waited for the door to open, "Maggie, you mind your manners. This woman is family." Family. 8-year-old Maddie had not asked what that meant. 8-year-old Maddie had said, "Yes, ma'am," and held the jar. 22-year-old Maddie was about to find out. The house was a narrow blue clapboard cottage with white shutters and a slate walk lined in chrysanthemums gone copper for the season. A wind chime made of old silver spoons hung from the porch eaves. The mailbox said Whitcomb in faded brass letters. Maddie climbed the porch. She did not let herself think. Because thinking right now would undo her. Because the ledger pressed under her ribs felt like a second heart beating off rhythm with her own. Because somewhere in town, Thaddeus Ashcroft III was already making phone calls she did not want to imagine. She knocked. The door opened. Lillian Whitcomb was a small woman with very white hair pulled into a low knot at the back of her neck. She wore a navy cardigan over a turtleneck. She wore reading glasses on a chain. She had the kind of face that had spent 71 years deciding which things were worth a frown and had concluded that most of them were. She looked at Maddie. She looked at the suitcase, the dirt on Maddie's knees, the leaf stuck in Maddie's hair, the bulk in Maddie's coat where the ledger and notebook sat. She looked at Maddie's face. She did not say hello. She said, "Get inside." Maddie got inside. The door closed behind her. The hallway smelled like cinnamon and old wood polish and something herbal Maddie could not place. The wallpaper was a deep green damask. A grandfather clock ticked from the parlor. Lillian moved past her toward the kitchen without waiting to see if Maddie would follow. Maddie followed. The kitchen was small and warm. A teapot sat on the back of an enameled stove, steam curling from its spout. Lillian poured 2 cups without asking. She set one on the table in front of an empty chair. She sat down in the other chair. She nodded at the empty one. Maddie sat. She wrapped her hands around the cup. Her hands shook. "Drink the tea, Magdalene." "I drink it." She drank it. It was too hot. It scalded her tongue. She kept drinking. Lillian watched her. When Maddie set the cup down, Lillian said, "Take a breath." Maddie took a breath. Another. Maddie took another. "Now," said Lillian, very calm, "tell me what you found." And there it was. "No, how are you? No, I'm so sorry about Winona. No, it's been so long." Lillian Whitcomb knew. Lillian had known her whole life. Lillian had been waiting for somebody to walk up that porch in dirt-stained jeans with a leather ledger pressed against her ribs. Maddie put the ledger on the table. She slid it across. Lillian did not pick it up. Lillian looked at it the way a person looks at a body they once buried. "The cellar," she said. "Yes." "You opened it?" "Yes." "Winona told you how?" "In a letter before she died." "Of course she did, the coward." Maddie flinched. Lillian's mouth tightened. She closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, something in her face had loosened. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm sorry, child. That was an old anger, not for you." "It's all right." "It's not. But thank you." Lillian reached for the ledger. She opened the cover. She read the first entry. Her hands did not shake. Hers were the hands of a woman who had been preparing for this morning since she was a girl. She turned the page. She turned another. Her eyes moved fast. Her mouth moved slightly the way some readers do, repeating the names without sound. 814 Elm Street, 27 Garrison Lane, 201 West Sycamore, the Beasley family, the Duerner family, the Whitcomb family. Lillian stopped on that page. She placed her hand flat on the entry. "There we are," she said. Maddie's spine went cold. "Lillian, my grandfather, Augustin Whitcomb, December of 1932. They took his hardware store first, then the house. He hanged himself in the barn on the property they had stolen 3 weeks before Christmas. My grandmother was 26 years old. My father was 4. Maddie did not breathe. My father grew up in a tenement on the river. Lillian continued, her voice as steady as if she were reading a recipe card. My mother grew up in another. They met because they both worked at a sawmill on Route 9 that has not existed since I was a girl. They married in 1947. They had me in 1955. She closed the ledger gently. She looked up. I am your third cousin, Magdalene, on Imogen's side. Your great-grandmother was my grandmother's sister. Maddie put her hands over her face. The kitchen went very quiet. The grandfather clock ticked. The teapot on the stove released a small, contented hiss. When Maddie finally lowered her hands, her cheeks were wet. She had not noticed beginning to cry. Why didn't I know? She whispered. Because Winona did not want you to know. Why? Because she was protecting you. From what? From him, child. Lillian tapped the ledger. From them. From the people who did this. The Ashcrofts have had eyes on our family for 90 years. Every Crowder child has grown up under that gaze. Winona thought if you did not know we existed, they would not bother to look at us. She thought she was wrapping us in a kind of fog. She was for a while until she wasn't. Until Mama. Lillian closed her eyes. When she opened them, she said, Drink your tea, child. We have an hour if we're lucky. Maybe 2. Then what? Then we are going to see a man I do not particularly want to see. And we are going to ask him to do something he does not particularly want to do. Who? Ambrose Halverson. Maddie blinked. The lawyer. The lawyer. On Pine Street. The same. He won the dog case. He won many things before he stopped winning anything. He retired. He hid. Why? Lillian stood up. She crossed the kitchen. She lifted a phone from the wall, a real phone with a coiled cord, and held the receiver in her hand for a moment without dialing. She looked back at Maddie. Because Ambrose Halverson, she said, is the son of the man who notarized half the deeds in that ledger. His father was the Ashcroft family's personal attorney from 1949 to 1971. Ambrose has spent 40 years trying to be a different man than his father. He has done it well, but he has never gone near the Ashcrofts, and when he sees what you brought me, he is going to want to walk out of his own office. Will he? That depends entirely on you, child. Why on me? Because you are the only thing in this story that doesn't owe anyone an apology. Lillian dialed. She spoke for 47 seconds. Maddie counted. When Lillian hung up, she said, He'll see us in 20 minutes. Wash your face. There's a guest bathroom at the end of the hall. I'll get my coat. Maddie washed her face. In the mirror over the sink, she did not recognize herself. Her eyes were her mother's. She had not noticed that before. Or she had noticed and had not let herself notice. Vera's eyes had been a pale, untrusting gray, and Maddie's were a pale, untrusting gray, and they had been pretending all morning to be anything else. She put her hands on the rim of the sink. She did not collapse. She had not collapsed yet, and she was not going to start now. The Whitcomb family had lost their home and their grandfather in December of 1932. The Crowder family had lost Vera in April of 2013. Maddie did not yet know how many other families on the pages of the ledger had a date in a graveyard. But she would. She would. She dried her face on a hand towel embroidered with a small wren. A small wren. She stared at the wren. The Crowder women had not survived. They had not even been quiet. They had been a slow secret army. Imogen with her ledger. Winona with her ivy. Vera with her notebooks. Lillian in this kitchen with a tea kettle and a phone holding the line for a child she had been forbidden to claim. Maddie folded the towel. She placed it back on the ring. She walked out to the hallway. Lillian was waiting. Lillian had on a long camel coat and a felt hat. The hat had a small feather. Lillian Whitcomb looked in that hat like a woman about to do something she had been delayed from doing for 50 years. Come on, child. Yes, ma'am. And stop calling me ma'am. We are family, and family is short of breath enough without titles. Maddie almost smiled. She did not quite, but she almost. The lawyer's office was a brick row house on Pine Street that had a brass plaque so weathered the name was barely legible. Halverson Law, a green door, a wreath of dried lavender on a hook. The bell rang an old, deep, throaty note when Lillian pressed it. Ambrose Halverson answered. He was a tall man, late 60s, white hair worn long enough to be unfashionable, a heavy cardigan over a flannel shirt. He had the look of a person who had once been a knife and was now an old knife in a drawer. He saw Lillian, he saw Maddie, he saw the leather ledger in Maddie's hands. His face went the color of putty. No, he said. Lillian said, bros. No, Lil, no. Just look. I know what it is. I have known what it is for 40 years. I am not opening that door. You opened it the day you took the bar exam. I closed it. Doors don't close in this town, bros. You know that better than I do. He stood in his doorway. He looked old. He looked angry. He looked more than anything frightened. Of what Maddie could not say, but it was old fear. Deep fear, the fear of a man who has spent a lifetime arranging his life to avoid one particular conversation and was about to have it. Maddie stepped forward. She had not planned to. Her body moved before her mind. Mr. Halverson. Miss Crowder. You know my name. I have known your name since you were 6 years old. You knew my mother. He flinched. I knew of her. You knew her. He said nothing. Maddie held up the ledger. My mother did not die in an accident, Mr. Halverson. His face did not change, but his hand, the one against the door frame, went very white at the knuckles. You don't know that? I do. I have her notebooks. She wrote it. She wrote that B. Ashcroft Jr. threatened her by name 6 days before she died. She wrote it, in ink, in her own hand. Black ice, Mr. Halverson. Black ice in April. On a road she drove every day. Miss Crowder. She was silenced because she was going to walk into the SEC and report what your father notarized. Miss Crowder, please. I am 22 years old, and I am out of grandmothers. I am out of mothers. I am out of houses. I am out of everything except this. She held up the ledger again. Her hand did not shake. And I will walk into the Boston Globe with this ledger and a flash drive and the 6 notebooks my mother left me before lunch tomorrow if I have to. I will do it without your help. I am asking, not requiring. Ambrose Halverson stared at her for a long, terrible moment, and then he stepped back from the door. Come in. Lillian made a sound very like a sigh. They came in. The office smelled like pipe tobacco and lemon oil and a small fire someone had been keeping going in a wood stove in the back. The front room was a study lined floor to ceiling with law books, a worn Persian rug, a desk piled with paper, a single client chair leather deeply cracked, a second chair pulled from a sitting room next door. Ambrose sat down behind the desk. He pressed his palms flat against its surface. He said, show me. Maddie set the ledger on the desk. She opened it to the first page. He read. He read for 32 minutes. Lillian sat very still. The fire ticked. A clock somewhere ticked. When Ambrose Halverson finally looked up, his eyes had changed. They had been dim when he opened the door. They were not dim now. This is real. Yes. This is the real ledger. Yes. Your great-grandmother kept this. Every entry in her hand. For 90 years. For 90 years. He sat back in his chair. He closed his eyes. He put one hand over his face. When he lowered the hand, he looked at Lillian. He said very quietly, I am sorry, Lillian. Lillian said, don't. I am sorry for what my father, don't, bros. What my father, don't. He stopped. She softened, just a little. She reached across the desk and put her hand over his. She said, "You did not do this, Ambrose. You inherited it. There is a difference. You are about to do the thing your father did not do. That is the only sentence I care about." He nodded. He nodded again. He pulled his hand away. He picked up a pen. He pulled a yellow legal pad toward him. He said, "Tell me everything." So they told him. Maddie told him about the conservatory, the plinth, the brass key, the copper-banded door, the room beneath, the crates, the bonds, the contract pressed beside the wren orchid, the rosewood box, the notebooks, the flash drive, the flash drive. Maddie remembered the flash drive halfway through telling him about it. She pulled it from her pocket. She set it on the desk. Ambrose picked it up. He held it the way a priest might hold a relic. Password. My mother wrote that it's the date I was born, backwards, which is December 19th, 2003, backwards, 3002921. He nodded. He swiveled his chair to the credenza behind him. An ancient desktop computer woke up grudgingly. He inserted the flash drive. He typed. He typed again. The screen flickered. A folder opened. 43 files, spreadsheets, PDFs, photographs of documents. A folder labeled Foreclosure Originals. A folder labeled Bank Officers 1932 to 1940. A folder labeled Vera. Ambrose opened the Vera folder. Inside were 3 subfolders. April 12th meeting, April 16th recording, April 17th voicemail. Ambrose's hand stopped on the mouse. Maddie's heart stopped in her chest. Lillian leaned forward in her chair without making a sound. Ambrose opened April 16th recording, a single audio file. He clicked it. Vera Crowder Penberthy's voice came out of the small speakers. Maddie was not prepared. She had not heard her mother's voice in 13 years. It was a soft voice, a little hoarse, a little tired. Her mother had been 38 years old and tired. Maddie had not remembered the tiredness in her mother's voice. She had remembered laughing. She had remembered humming over the dishes. She had not remembered tired. The voice said, "This is Vera Crowder Penberthy. The date is April 16th, 2013. I am at my home in Hollowmere. I am recording this because earlier this evening, I received a phone call from a man identifying himself as a representative of Berkshire Heritage Trust. He did not give a name. He told me, I will try to quote him exactly. He told me, 'You have a child. We know where she goes to school. We are not threatening her. We are reminding you that you have one.' I told him I understood his message. I hung up. I am recording this because I am no longer confident I will be able to file with the SEC. I am asking my mother if she finds this to take it to the Globe. And I am asking my daughter if she finds this when she is old enough, Maggie baby, to know that I loved you. I love you. I am not afraid." A pause. "That is a lie. I am afraid. But I am still going to file." A click. The recording ended. The office was silent. Then Lillian made a small sound, the kind of sound a woman makes when she has been waiting to make it for a very long time. She bent her head forward over the desk. She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. Maddie was not crying. Maddie had gone past crying. Maddie was somewhere on the other side of crying in a country where crying did not work, and you had to use something colder. Ambrose Halverson rose from his chair. He crossed to a small cabinet in the corner. He unlocked it. He pulled out a manila folder. He brought it back to the desk. He laid it down. He said, "This is a contingency file I have kept since 1998. Lillian raised her head. "What?" "My father died in 1995 when I cleared out his office. I found things. I have kept them. I never knew what to do with them. I think I was waiting." "For what?" "For a Crowder child to walk through my door with that ledger." He opened the folder. Inside were photocopies, documents, letters, A photograph faded of a man in a 1960s suit standing beside another man smiling in front of the Berkshire Heritage Trust headquarters. Ambrose pointed at the smiling man. "This is my father, this is Roland Halverson, and this is Beauregard Ashcroft Jr., Thaddeus's father, the man who is still alive, Maddie, 81 years old, lives in a stone house in Lenox, drinks port wine every night with a private nurse, has not been to the bank in 15 years, but he still runs it. Every decision Thaddeus makes goes through that house in Lenox. Maddie said he's the one who called my mother. He is the one who ordered the call. Yes, I believe so. You believe. I will know in a week. Give me a week." Maddie stared at the photograph. The man standing next to Roland Halverson had a face that did not look cruel. He looked, in fact, slightly bored, as if he were tolerating the photographer, as if smiling were a thing he did because the photographer had asked. She had imagined him cruel. He was not cruel. He was bored. That was worse. Bored men gave orders to ruin other women's lives because Tuesday afternoon was a slow day for them. Maddie said, "What do we do?" Ambrose closed the folder. He looked at Lillian. He looked at Maddie. He said, "We do three things. We do them in order we do them today." "Tell me." "First, I make digital copies of everything you brought me and everything in this folder. I send the copies to 4 people. One is a reporter at the Boston Globe. Her name is Constance Vale. She is a friend. She owes me. 2 is an attorney at the Department of Justice in Washington, whose office I do not name in this room. 3 is the SEC Enforcement Office in Boston. 4 is my home safe. We make 4 copies. We do not make less than 4 copies. Less than 4 copies means we lose the only ones that matter when somebody breaks in. Yes? Second, we secure your physical safety, your safety, Lillian's safety. We do that by moving you to a place Ashcroft does not know about and cannot easily find. Lillian's house is not safe. They will check there within the hour. There is a place. I will tell you when we are in the car. Yes. Third, we file an emergency injunction this afternoon to block the demolition of your property. Demolition. I assume he will try. He's evicting. He was evicting. As of the moment you open that cellar, he is no longer evicting. He is destroying. Houses with evidence in their basements are not evicted. They are flattened. He will move fast. We have to move faster. Maddie put her hands flat on the desk. She made herself breathe. How fast? Hours. Hours. Hours, Maddie. Lillian said, "He's right." Maddie said, "I have one thing to do first." Ambrose said, "What?" She pulled the 2013 notebook out of her coat. She set it on the desk between them. She said, "There is a page in here I have not read. The page my mother bookmarked. I want all 3 of us to read it together. I have not been able to do it alone. I want it read out loud in this room by you, Mr. Halverson, because you are a witness and you are an officer of the court. And because if there is something in this notebook that matters in a courtroom, it should be read into existence by somebody who knows what to do with it." Ambrose looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. She opened the notebook. She found the bookmark page. Vera Crowder Penberthy had folded the top corner down. Maddie passed the notebook across the desk. Ambrose Halverson cleared his throat. He read aloud, April 14th, 2013. After I sent Maggie to her piano lesson, I went out to the garage. I am writing this down because I'm afraid I am not imagining what I think I am seeing. There is something wrong with the brake line on the Subaru. Something deliberate. Something a person has done with a tool. I went to Carol's on Route 9 yesterday for a regular service, and the boy told me the line was fine. It is not fine today. I am writing this. I am putting this notebook in the rosewood box tonight. I am driving the Subaru tomorrow because if I do not drive it, they will know I know, and they will find another way. If I drive it, I have a chance of catching them in the act of failure. I am going to tell my mother where the box is, and the rest is in God's hands. Ambrose stopped reading. He set the notebook down very carefully. He closed his eyes. Lillian was weeping. Maddie was not. Maddie was somewhere very far away in a kitchen in a place where her 9-year-old self was standing on a wooden stool drying dishes while her mother washed them. Her mother was humming. The water was running. The window was open. There was a cardinal in the rhododendron. Her mother had not yet driven the Subaru that morning, was 4 years away yet, and Maddie was 9, and the world was a place that contained mothers in it. Maddie said very quietly, "She knew." Ambrose said yes. She drove that car on purpose. She had no choice. She had a choice. Maddie, she had a choice. She could have grabbed me out of school and driven north and never stopped. She had a choice, and she made it. She drove the car to give my grandmother time to find the box, to give me time to grow up. She traded her life for proof. She put a hand over her mouth. She held it there. The cardinal in her memory was singing very loudly, or that was a sound in her ears, or she was about to faint. She did not faint. She was a Crowder woman, and Crowder women did not faint. She lowered her hand. She said, "Make the copies." Ambrose said, "Yes." "Make 4, make 6, make 10, I don't care." "Yes." "And then we go to the aviary." "Maddie, no. We go to the aviary." "Maddie, he will be there, the contractors will be there, the sheriff will be there. We will go nowhere near that house tonight." "We go to the aviary tonight, Mr. Halverson, because everything left in that basement that we did not bring with us is going to be a pile of rubble by sunrise. There are crates I did not open. There are safes I did not crack. There are 3 deed boxes I did not even see. There is at least one more book of my mother's I did not have time to take, and I am not letting it become dust." Lillian, still wiping her eyes, said, "Bros." Ambrose put his face in his hands. When he looked up, he said, "I want it on the record that I tried to stop you." Maddie almost smiled. She did not quite, but she almost. She said, "Noted." He stood up. He moved. For the next 40 minutes, Ambrose Halverson moved as if he were 30 again. He copied the flash drive onto 2 thumb drives and a cloud drive that Maddie had not heard of, and a small encrypted SD card he kept in his desk. He photographed every page of the ledger with a phone scanner. He photographed the contract. He photographed Vera's notebooks one by one, every page. He emailed 3 of those 4 packages with cover notes too sharp to be ignored. He printed a working set for himself. While he photographed, Lillian made sandwiches in a kitchenette behind the office and forced one into Maddie's hand. Maddie ate it. She could not have said what was on it. While Lillian made sandwiches, Maddie sat down with the 2010 notebook of Vera's and opened it. The first 30 pages were ordinary. Grocery lists, notes about Maddie's piano, a drawing of a dog, a recipe for biscuits. Page 31 changed. Page 31 was the beginning of a cipher. Maddie had taken 1 semester of cryptography as an elective sophomore year. The professor had been a tiny woman from Lithuania who taught the course because she missed her grandfather, who had broken Soviet ciphers in Vilnius during the war. Maddie had thought at the time that the elective was useless. She had taken it because her advisor said it would round out her transcript. She had been wrong about it being useless. The cipher was a substitution cipher with a rolling key. The key, helpfully, was written along the bottom of page 31 in small numbered boxes beside a doodle of a wren. Vera had not been hiding the key from her daughter. She had been hiding the key from anyone who picked up the notebook and was not Maddie. Maddie pulled a pencil from the desk. She began to work. It took her 16 minutes. She lifted her head when she had decoded the central passage. She said, "Mr. Halverson." He looked up from his copier. "Yes, my mother also decoded a passage in Imogen's ledger. She found something I would not have found because she was older than I am, and she remembered Imogen herself. Imogen taught her this cipher when she was a girl. It was a game between them." "What does it say?" Maddie read aloud. "My grandmother is not what Holomir believes she is. She is not the witch they think. She is not the accomplice in the books. She did not help Beauregard. She watched him. For 40 years. She fed him just enough of what he wanted that he believed she was his. She fed him recipes for ruin and asked him to sign the dishes. The ledger in the cellar is not her bookkeeping. It is her evidence. Imogen Crowder was a witness in plain sight, and she pretended to be a partner in plain sight. And she went to her grave with the work undone because she had no one she could trust to finish it. She would not trust me because she said I had a child. She said a woman with a child cannot be a witness. A woman with a child has to be a mother first. She told me she had been waiting for a granddaughter without one. I am sorry, Maggie. I had you and I tried to finish her work anyway. Forgive me. Maddie stopped reading. She closed the notebook. Lillian had gone white. Ambrose had not moved. Lillian whispered, "Sweet God." Maddie said she wasn't an accomplice. She was a witness. She let an entire town think she helped him because that was how she stayed alive. For 90 years, she has been called the Witch of Hollowmere, and she was never that. She was the woman in the room, writing it down. Lillian said she knew everything. She knew everything. She let them think she was a partner. She let them think it. She had to. Every day she didn't, she died. Ambrose finally moved. He walked slowly to the window. He looked out at Pine Street. The sky was the color of pewter. The maples were halfway through losing their leaves. He said without turning, "Your great-grandmother is the best legal witness against the Ashcroft family who ever lived in this state. And we have her in writing, in her own hand, with 90 years of cross-reference primary documents." Maddie said yes. He turned. "Maddie?" "Yes. We are going to win." She did not answer. She did not know yet whether winning was the right word for whatever was coming. Winning suggested a contest. What she had in front of her felt more like a long, narrow tunnel. She had walked through one already today. She was prepared to walk through more. She said, "What's next?" Ambrose said, "We move you, you and Lillian. There's a safe house. It isn't really a safe house. It's a cabin. It belongs to a client of mine who is in Florida until April on the north shore of Onoda Lake. 20 minutes. We go now. We take the back roads. I drive. And then? And then I file the emergency injunction. And then at 6 this evening, we go to the aviary. At 6. Sunset is at 5:50. I want us at the gate at 6. If he is going to demolish, he is going to demolish under lights. And lights are visible from town, and a man with a film crew and a court order in his pocket can sometimes change what happens under lights. Maddie said, "Film crew. I have a friend." "You have a lot of friends, Mr. Halverson. 40 years of doing one job well will do that." Lillian said, "Bros." He looked at her. She said, "Your father would have stopped this morning." He nodded. He said, "I am not my father." She said, "I know, dear. I just needed to hear you say it." They left through the back of the office. Ambrose drove a battered green Volvo with 200,000 miles on it and a single bumper sticker that read, "Fall Foliage Tour 1994. He drove the back roads. He did not exceed the speed limit. He did not look in the rearview mirror except in the way a man looks who has driven the same road for 50 years and does not particularly need to look. In the passenger seat, Maddie watched the road. In the back seat, Lillian Whitcomb sat with her hands folded in her lap and looked out the window. She was very still. Maddie reached back. She put her hand on top of Lillian's. Lillian did not look at her, but Lillian turned her hand and laced her fingers through Maddie's and squeezed. Maddie squeezed back. The cabin on Onoda Lake was a small log structure with a stone chimney and a porch that overhung the water. The owner was a retired veterinarian who had treated Ambrose's golden retriever for 14 years. There was a key under a clay frog by the porch step. There was firewood stacked under a green tarp. There was a coffee maker. There was running water. There was, more importantly, no one to see who arrived or left. Ambrose carried in the documents. Maddie carried the suitcase. Lillian carried 2 grocery bags Ambrose had stopped for on the way. They sat at the small pine table. Ambrose opened his laptop. He filed the emergency injunction. It took 11 minutes. He hit submit. He closed the laptop. He said, "Now we wait." Maddie said, "How long?" "An hour, maybe 2. And in the meantime, you eat something. You drink water, you call no one, you text no one. You let Lillian and me handle the next 40 minutes. She nodded. She did not eat. She did, however, drink water. She walked out to the porch. The lake was very still. A loon called from somewhere across the water. The trees on the far shore were a bright, painful gold. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She had forgotten she had her phone. She pulled it out. It was a text from a number she did not recognize, a Massachusetts area code. She opened the text. Miss Crowder, I do not have much time. Please do not reply to this number. I have been at the aviary for the last 40 minutes. I am the deputy who was on the porch this morning. I have seen what they brought to demolish your house. I have seen the permit. The permit is signed by my own sheriff. The sheriff is on the payroll. I know this because I have been documenting it for 14 months. I have a recording. I do not yet have a way to deliver to anyone safe. I do not know who is safe. I am writing to you because I overheard a phone call between the sheriff and Mr. Ashcroft at 1:15 this afternoon, in which Mr. Ashcroft instructed the sheriff to make you go away permanently. I am writing this in plain language, and I have the exact words on tape. Please understand that I am writing as a person, not as a deputy. If you have a lawyer, tell him my name. Tabitha Ainsworth. Badge 4417. Maddie stared at her phone. The loon called again. A long, lonely single note that ran out over the water and did not come back. She read the text again. She walked back inside. Ambrose was at the table. Lillian was filling the coffee pot. Maddie set the phone down on the wood beside Ambrose's elbow. She did not say anything. He read. He read it twice. Then he said one word very quiet, and Maddie had never heard him say a word like it before. He said, "Good." Maddie said, "Good." "Good, Maddie. We have a deputy. We have a recording. We have a film crew at 6 o'clock. We have an injunction. We have a ledger. And a sheriff who's on the payroll." "Yes." "And a man who just told a sheriff to make me go away." Ambrose looked up at her. He said very calmly, "Maddie, listen to me. You are going to be all right. I am 68 years old, and I have spent 40 years of my life avoiding a moment exactly like this one. And I am telling you with as much certainty as I have ever spoken with that you are not alone in this. Not in this cabin. Not at 6 o'clock. Not at the aviary. Not anywhere." She said, "How do you know?" He said, "Because Imogen built a tunnel, Maddie. Because Vera drove a car. Because Winona left you a letter. Because Lillian opened her door. Because Tabitha Ainsworth, whoever she is, just texted a stranger because she could not live with what she had heard. Because you this morning lifted the right hand of a marble Athena. Because the Crowder women have been spending their lives to give you this afternoon, and the work of all 5 of those women does not get to be erased by a man in Italian shoes who has not yet realized how much trouble he is in." Maddie did not answer. She could not. She walked back out to the porch. She watched the lake. The sun was lowering. The light on the water was the gold of old brass cages. She thought of the dome at the aviary, the 316 empty cages, the ivy that had grown over them. The cages had not held birds in 80 years. The cages had held something else. The cages had held a promise. She closed her eyes. She listened. Behind her in the cabin, she could hear Lillian Whitcomb humming. The melody was old. It was the melody of a lullaby. Maddie did not know the song, but she knew in the bones of her that her great-grandmother had hummed it, and that her grandmother had hummed it, and that her mother had hummed it, and that she had heard it before somewhere in a room she could not quite remember before everything. She listened to it. Behind the humming faintly, she could hear Ambrose Halverson speaking on the phone. His voice was low. His voice was the voice of a man arranging the next 3 hours of his life, and the next 3 hours of someone else's life, and possibly the next 3 hours of an entire town's life. Maddie opened her eyes. The sun was setting. In an hour and 40 minutes, the aviary would be lit, either by stadium floodlights set up by Thaddeus Ashcroft's contractors so they could see what they were demolishing, or by the cameras of a film crew Ambrose Halverson had called, or by both. She thought of her mother. She thought of her mother sitting at the kitchen table on the morning of April 17th, 2013, drinking coffee, knowing. She turned. She went back inside. They left the cabin at 5:35. The Volvo's headlights pushed pale cones through the October dusk. Ambrose drove. Lillian sat in the back with a thermos of coffee balanced on her knee. Maddie sat in the passenger seat with the ledger in her lap and the rosewood box at her feet. The plan was simple. The plan was also insane. Maddie kept turning it over in her head and finding the cracks. There were a lot of cracks. There would be more cracks in the next 2 hours. Ambrose had spent the last 45 minutes on the phone. He had reached and ordered Constance Vale at the Boston Globe, a producer at WGBH, who owed him a favor from a corruption case in 1994, an SEC enforcement attorney in Boston, a federal magistrate in Springfield who was now considering an emergency restraining order, and a woman named Tabitha Ainsworth who had picked up on the second ring and not said a word for the first 10 seconds. Tabitha had then said, "I want immunity." Ambrose had said, "You'll have it." Tabitha had said, "How do I know?" Ambrose had said, "Because I am Ambrose Halverson, and 40 years of trying to be a different man than my father is going to be useless if I lie to you tonight." There had been a small silence on the line. Then Tabitha had said, "All right." That was the call that had decided everything. Now they drove. The road that climbed up to the aviary was a county road, 2 lanes lined with sugar maples that had gone the color of rust. Maddie watched the trees go by. She did not feel the seatbelt across her chest. She did not feel her own hands. Lillian leaned forward. She put her palm flat on Maddie's shoulder. She said, "Breathe, child." Maddie breathed. They crested the hill. Below them, in the bowl of land that held Hollowmere Lake, the aviary was lit up like a wound. 6 contractor floodlights had been wheeled in on portable stands. The lights pointed up at the dome from 6 different angles, and the dome, that ridiculous glass and iron pear-shaped impossibility, was glowing. Not in a beautiful way. In the way a tooth glows on an X-ray. 316 brass cages hung visible inside it, lit from below. Every cage casting a long, articulated shadow across the conservatory floor through the broken panes. A line of vehicles snaked along the driveway. 2 pickup trucks, a small bulldozer on a flatbed, a backhoe, a Berkshire Heritage Trust Company car, a sheriff's cruiser, and parked discreetly across the road by a stand of birches, a white WGBH van and a single black SUV that Maddie did not recognize. Maddie said, "He brought a bulldozer." Ambrose said, "I told you." He brought a bulldozer at 6 o'clock at night to a house that was supposed to be evicted at noon. Yes, this is not normal. No, this is panic. Yes. She closed her eyes. She opened them. She said, "Then I have him." Ambrose said, "We have him." He pulled the Volvo over 50 yards from the gate. He killed the headlights. He put the car in park. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Lillian unbuckled her seatbelt. She climbed out of the back. She walked around to Maddie's door. She opened it. She offered Maddie her hand. Maddie took it. She stepped out into the cold. The October air smelled like diesel exhaust and dry leaves. The floodlights cast strange double shadows. A small generator hummed somewhere in the dark. Voices carried from the gravel apron at the top of the drive. Thad's voice. The contractor's voice. A third voice she did not recognize. A car door opened behind them. A woman in a black coat got out of the SUV. She crossed the road. She was tall. She was maybe 50. She wore her hair short. She carried a leather satchel and a press badge on a lanyard. She did not look like a person used to being slowed down by the small obstacles of the world. She said, "Constance Vale, Boston Globe. I'm assuming you're Maddie." Maddie said yes. Constance said, "Then you and I have 11 minutes before I want you in front of a camera. WGBH is set up across the road. The reporter is Inez Marriott. She's good. She will not ambush you. She will ask 3 questions. Answer them however you want. You can also choose not to answer. I do not care. Nothing matters except that you are in frame and the dome is in frame behind you when Mr. Ashcroft realizes what's happening. What is happening? What's happening is that in 11 minutes, we are going to broadcast a question to Mr. Ashcroft on a live local feed that has been picked up by WBZ Boston as of she checked her watch 40 seconds ago. The feed is also being mirrored to a regional outlet in Springfield and a national outlet in New York that I will not name because I don't want to jinx it. Mr. Ashcroft does not yet know any of that. He thinks WGBH is here for a fluff piece on historic preservation. He has agreed to a brief interview. He believes himself charming. He has been told he has 30 seconds at the top to introduce himself. He does not know that the second half of that introduction is going to be you. Maddie said, "What if he doesn't say anything I can use?" Constance said, "He'll say something you can use." How do you know? Because I've watched the footage of him at 4 bank ribbon cuttings. He cannot resist a microphone. He thinks he is a much better actor than he is. He will overplay. They always overplay. Ambrose said, "Where's the deputy?" Constance said, "Inside her cruiser, she's keeping low. She'll move when I cue her. Don't worry about Tabitha. Tabitha is the steadiest person on this hill." Lillian said, "And the sheriff." The sheriff is the man in the brown jacket beside Mr. Ashcroft. He's looking at us. He sees the Volvo. He doesn't know who's in it yet. He will in about 90 seconds. Maddie said, "Then let's go." Constance said, "Hold." Maddie held. Constance reached into her satchel. She pulled out a small clip-on lavalier microphone. She handed it to Maddie. She showed her where to clip it. She showed her how to angle it. She said, "When Inez asks you a question, look at her, not at the camera, not at Mr. Ashcroft. Look at her like she's a kind stranger asking you a kind thing. The camera will love that. The audience will love that. Mr. Ashcroft will hate that. Do you understand?" Maddie said, "Yes." "Do you want to say anything to me before we start?" Maddie said, "Yes." "Say it." "I am not afraid." Constance Vale smiled. It was a small, professional, hard-edged smile. It was the smile of a woman who had been waiting for the right 22-year-old to walk through her career. She said, "I know, baby." She turned. She walked toward the gate. They followed her. At the gate, Thad saw them coming. Maddie watched his face. She watched it pass through 3 expressions in the space of 2 seconds. First irritation, then calculation, then a kind of flat, polite mask that he must have practiced in mirrors as a young man, a face he could put on in any board meeting, any deposition, any moment when a Crowder woman might happen to arrive on his property with a leather ledger pressed against her ribs. He smoothed his tie. He took a step forward. He said, "Miss Crowder, we have been looking for you." Maddie said nothing. She walked past him. She walked to where Inez Marriott was standing in front of the camera with a microphone in her hand and a small earpiece in her left ear. Inez Marriott was a woman in her 40s with a soft voice and warm eyes in a green wool coat. Maddie liked her immediately, which she suspected was the entire point of Inez Marriott. Inez said very gently, "Hi, Maddie." Maddie said, "Hi." Inez said, "You ready?" Maddie said, "Yes." Inez said, "Just look at me." Maddie looked at her. Behind them, the floodlights washed up the side of the dome. The cages glittered. The ivy moved a little in the wind. Somewhere off to Maddie's right, she could feel, not see, feel Thad watching her. He had not yet figured out that he was about to be in a different conversation than the one he had agreed to. The cameraman counted down with his fingers. 3, 2, 1. Inez Marriott said on live regional television, "I'm Inez Marriott, and I'm standing in front of the Hollowmere Aviary, the historic Crowder family estate where a foreclosure scheduled for noon today appears to have become something else. With me is Magdalene Crowder, the property's last living heir. Maddie, can you tell us what's happening here tonight?" Maddie said yes. She lifted the ledger so it was in frame. She said, "This is a leather-bound book my great-grandmother kept from November of 1932 through the spring of 1940. It is approximately 700 handwritten pages long. It documents the systematic foreclosure of 24 family-owned properties in Berkshire County by a banker named Beauregard Ashcroft. Mr. Ashcroft used predatory loans, coerced signatures, fabricated default notices, and at least 3 documented bribes of local officials to force these families out of their homes during the Great Depression. He then transferred those deeds to shell corporations he controlled. The properties he took include the parcel of land in downtown Hollowmere, where the current Berkshire Heritage Trust headquarters stands. A small movement to her right. She did not look. She knew it was Thad. She kept her eyes on Inez. She said, "My great-grandmother, Imogen Crowder, has been remembered in this town for 80 years as Mr. Ashcroft's accomplice. She was not. She was a witness. She kept this book in secret because she understood it would not be safe in her lifetime to release. She also kept treasury-bearer bonds in a vault beneath this house that represent the laundered profits of those 24 foreclosures. The bonds are still down there. The book has been in my coat pocket since approximately 10:30 this morning." Inez said, "Maddie, can you tell us what your mother had to do with this?" Maddie's mouth dried. She had not known Inez would ask that. She did not pause. She said, "Yes. My mother was Vera Crowder Penberthy. She died in April of 2013 on Route 9, 6 days after she met with Beauregard Ashcroft Jr. at the bank. She had told him she intended to file a complaint with the Securities and Exchange Commission. She kept notebooks. The notebooks are in my coat. She wrote before she died that she believed someone had tampered with her vehicle. She wrote it down. She drove it anyway." Inez said, "Maddie, I'm very sorry." Maddie said, "Thank you." There was a movement behind the camera then, a larger movement. Thaddeus Ashcroft III had stepped into the frame. Inez turned slightly. "Mr. Ashcroft," she said, "would you like to respond?" He had a microphone now, too. Someone had clipped it to him during the previous segment. He had probably believed it was for the historical preservation interview. He smiled. His smile was tight. He said, "Inez, I appreciate the opportunity. I want to be clear that the allegations Miss Crowder is making this evening are deeply painful for our community. Miss Crowder has experienced a recent grief and has understandably been struggling. Our bank has tried repeatedly to work with her through this transition. There is no record of any of what she just described. There is no SEC filing. There is no investigation. There is—" He stopped. He blinked. A new sound had entered the night air. It was the sound of car tires on gravel, several sets of tires. Maddie did not turn to look. Constance Vale off to the side was looking. Constance Vale was smiling. 3 federal vehicles had pulled up at the bottom of the drive. They were not technically federal vehicles. They were 3 black sedans, unmarked, but the 3 men and 1 woman who got out of them were wearing the kind of dark wool coats and the kind of soft-soled shoes that even Maddie recognized from television. The Springfield magistrate had moved faster than Ambrose had expected. The emergency motion had not been merely granted, it had been escalated. Thad saw them. His face slipped, just for a moment. The mask cracked along one cheekbone. Then he reset it. He said, "Inez, I want to be very careful here because Miss Crowder is making serious—" Inez said, "Mr. Ashcroft, just one moment. Maddie, did you bring a recording with you tonight?" Maddie said yes. She held up a small Bluetooth speaker Ambrose had handed her in the car. She said, "This is a recording my mother made on April 16th, 2013, 2 days before she died. It is also currently in the possession of the Securities and Exchange Commission as of approximately 3 this afternoon. I am playing it because I want Mr. Ashcroft to hear it. He has heard it before, but I think he has forgotten." She pressed the play button. Vera Crowder Penberthy's voice came out of the small speaker. The voice was thin in the open air. The cold sucked at it. The microphones picked it up cleanly. "This is Vera Crowder Penberthy. The date is April 16th, 2013. I am at my home in Hollowmere. I am recording this because earlier this evening, I received a phone call from a man identifying himself as a representative of Berkshire Heritage Trust. He did not give a name. He told me, I will try to quote him exactly. He told me, "You have a child. We know where she goes to school. We are not threatening her. We are reminding you that you have one." Thad's microphone caught a sound. A very small sound. A breath let out too fast. Maddie did not look at him. She let the recording play. It played for 2 minutes and 17 seconds. When it ended, Inez said very softly, "Mr. Ashcroft." He swallowed. He said that recording could be from anyone. Maddie said, "It's my mother." He said, "I have no comment." She said, "I have a comment." Her voice was steady. She had not known her voice could be that steady. She said, "Mr. Ashcroft, I have my mother's notebooks. In one of them, dated April 14th, 2013, she describes finding something wrong with her vehicle the day before she drove it for the last time. She drove it anyway. She drove it because she had decided that the only way to make the evidence usable was to outlive it, and she did not in the end outlive it. She left it for me. I am 22 years old. I am standing in front of you on the steps of the house your grandfather signed a contract to protect in exchange for my great-grandmother's silence about him. That contract is in my coat pocket. Your family broke that contract this morning when you came to evict me. I want to know on the record whether you knew about my mother." He stared at her. He did not say no. He should have said no. The thing about men in Italian shoes is that they have not generally practiced for the moment when somebody asks them a direct question on television with a federal investigator standing 12 feet behind them. He licked his lips. He said, "Miss Crowder, your mother was warned." Maddie said warned. He said she was told to stop. She did not. That was her decision. Maddie said her decision. He said, "I had no involvement in what happened to her vehicle." Inez said, "Mr. Ashcroft." He kept talking. This was the moment Constance Vale had warned her about. The overplay. He could not stop himself. He had a microphone. He had cameras. He had the floodlit dome of his own ruin glowing behind him. And he had spent his entire life being the most articulate person in every room. He said, "Miss Crowder, with respect, my father may have made certain decisions during a period when this town was a different place. I cannot speak for him. He is 81 years old. He stopped. He had hurt himself. He had said my father may have made certain decisions on live television, in front of 3 federal investigators, a Boston Globe reporter, a WGBH news team, and the daughter of the woman he had just said too much about. He looked for just a moment like a man who had been startled awake. He closed his mouth. He took a step back. He said, "I think we should continue this in a different setting." Inez said, "Mr. Ashcroft, just to be clear, are you saying your father, Beauregard Ashcroft Jr., was involved in what happened to Vera Crowder Penberthy?" He said, "I am not saying anything further." He turned. He began to walk back toward the company car. He did not get there. A woman in a sheriff's uniform stepped in front of him. She was small. She had her hair in a low brown ponytail. Her hat was off. Her face was the face of someone who had been waiting a long time for the next 2 minutes. She said, "Mr. Ashcroft, I need you to stay where you are." He said, "Deputy." She said, "Officer Ainsworth." He said, "Officer, the sheriff is right behind me." She said, "The sheriff is currently sitting in the back of my cruiser. I cuffed him there 4 minutes ago." He blinked. He looked past her. He saw the cruiser. He saw dimly in the back of the cruiser the shape of a man in a brown jacket with his head tipped back against the metal mesh. Thad said, "On what grounds?" Tabitha Ainsworth pulled a small voice recorder from her uniform jacket. She said, "On the grounds of 14 months of recorded conversations between Sheriff Cleary and yourself, including a phone call from 1:15 this afternoon in which you instructed Sheriff Cleary to make Miss Crowder disappear permanently. The exact phrasing is on tape. I have already turned it over." She said it loud enough for the WGBH microphone to pick it up. She said it loud enough for Inez to lean forward and not interrupt. She said it loud enough, Maddie realized, for the federal investigators at the bottom of the drive to begin walking up. Thad's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Tabitha Ainsworth turned her body slightly. She was no longer addressing Thad. She was addressing the camera. She said, "My name is Tabitha Ainsworth. I am 26 years old. I have served as a deputy with the Hollamere Township Sheriff's Department for 3 years and 4 months. My grandmother was Adelaide Bell. Her family home at 411 Garrison Lane was foreclosed on by Beauregard Ashcroft Sr. in February of 1933. She lost her father 6 months later. She raised 6 children in a tenement on the Housatonic River. She died last spring. I took this job because I knew from the day I graduated the academy that the man currently standing in front of me was going to make a mistake one day and that I needed to be the deputy on the scene when he made it. He has now made it. I have a flash drive of 14 months of recordings in my uniform pocket. I am turning them over on camera right now to the federal investigators currently approaching this property." She held up the flash drive. She did not hand it to a federal investigator. She handed it to Maddie. Maddie took it. Maddie looked at her. Tabitha gave her one very small nod. It was the nod a woman gives a woman when they have between them just rearranged the rest of their lives. Maddie held the flash drive out to the lead federal investigator who had reached them. The woman in the dark wool coat. The woman with the soft-soled shoes. The investigator said Magdalene Crowder. Maddie said, "Yes, ma'am." The investigator said, "I'm Lenora Pruitt. I'm with the SEC Enforcement Office in Boston. We received Mr. Halverson's package at 3:46 this afternoon. We have been reading it on the drive up here. I am very sorry to be meeting you under these circumstances." Maddie said, "Thank you for coming." Lenora Pruitt said, "Mr. Ashcroft." Thad did not answer. Lenora Pruitt said, "Mr. Ashcroft, we are not arresting you tonight. That will happen on a different schedule, in a different jurisdiction, by different officers, after a different conversation with your attorney. But I need you to remain on the premises. I need your phone, I need your laptop, and I need you to understand that the vehicles parked along this driveway are not going to be moving anything tonight." She gestured. 2 of her colleagues moved past her toward the contractors. The contractors had been standing in a tight, anxious cluster for the last 6 minutes. The man closest to the bulldozer dropped his cigarette into the gravel and ground it out under his boot. The cigarette had been unlit. He had not noticed. The contractors did not argue. The contractors had been told they were here for a midnight demolition of a Victorian eyesore. They were rapidly understanding that they were here for something else. Maddie turned in place. She looked up at the aviary. The floodlights still poured up its side. The dome still glowed. The 316 brass cages still hung inside it, lit from below. But something had changed. Something in the way the light was sitting on the iron ribs. Something in the way the ivy moved. It was perhaps that the house was no longer about to be destroyed. Or it was perhaps that the house had been waiting since 1882 for the right woman to stand under it, holding the right book on the right night. Maddie did not know. Maddie could not tell and would not be able to tell for a long time whether what she was feeling on her shoulders was the wind off the lake or the hand of her great-grandmother. She closed her eyes. Behind her, Inez Marriott was finishing the broadcast in a low, steady voice. Beside her, Lenora Pruitt was reading Thaddeus Ashcroft, his rights with respect to a federal subpoena that had not yet been written but would be in the morning. Behind the contractors, Constance Vale was already typing on her phone, drafting the front page for tomorrow's edition. In the cruiser, Sheriff Cleary had begun to cry. In the SUV across the road, 2 more journalists had arrived. And next to Maddie, very close, Lillian Wickham had put her arm around Maddie's waist and was not going anywhere. By midnight, the aviary had been declared an active federal crime scene. By 2 in the morning, the bonds in the cellar had been counted to the nearest 100. There were 3,412 of them. They totaled on paper $34 million at face value. Their actual current value would not be calculated for several months. By 4 in the morning, Beauregard Ashcroft Jr. had been taken into custody at his home in Lenox. He had been wearing a silk robe. He had not been informed by anyone that he was going to be photographed in it. By dawn, Thaddeus Ashcroft III had been suspended without pay from Berkshire Heritage Trust, which would be in federal receivership within 72 hours. By noon the next day, the Boston Globe led with a single front-page photograph, Maddie Crowder, 22, standing at the foot of the aviary's stone steps with the ledger held in front of her like a small, dangerous shield. The dome glowed behind her. The headline was 3 words. It read, "She was loud." The dome was reglazed. It took 18 months. A team of restoration glaziers from a workshop outside Albany hand-cut every replacement pane. The new glass was clear where the old had been in places almost opaque with grime. The iron ribs were rust-treated and repainted in the original 1882 color, a deep blue black that did not catch shadows as harshly as the old soot-darkened iron had done. The 316 brass cages were all taken down. They were not thrown away. They were cleaned by hand by a rotating volunteer crew of women from Hollowmere and the surrounding county over the course of one long, slow summer. Each cage was polished and arranged in a permanent exhibit along the curving walls of the conservatory. Each cage held inside it a single laminated card. The cards bore the names of women, women who had lost homes during the Depression, women who had been silenced during the Cold War, women whose voices had been buried by family or by banks or by sheriffs or by silence. 24 names from Imogen's ledger, 87 more from the Foundation's first audit, 131 more from the second. Above the central staircase, where the conservatory's iron spiral wound up toward the dome, hung a small bronze plaque. The plaque said, "The Crowder Foundation, founded 2026. We are not cages anymore." The foundation occupied the entire ground floor of the aviary. The eastern wing was the legal aid clinic. The clinic offered free representation with priority for women over the age of 60 in cases involving predatory lending, reverse mortgages, contested wills, and elder financial abuse. The clinic was overseen by Ambrose Halverson, who had come out of retirement at the age of 68 and had remained out of retirement ever since. He kept regular office hours on Tuesdays and Thursdays. He still drove the green Volvo. The bumper sticker was the same. The western wing was the museum. It documented in 3 small permanent galleries the systematic foreclosure schemes of the early 1930s, the cooperation of local officials, and the role of women as both victims and witnesses. Between 1929 and 1934, by the Foundation's accounting, an estimated 200,000 American families had lost their homes to coordinated fraud schemes that had never been adequately investigated. The center of the museum and the rotunda directly under the dome held a single object. It was the leather-bound ledger. It sat under museum glass on a brass stand open to the page that bore the Wren orchid and the signed contract. On the evening of October 18th, 2031, 18 years to the day after Vera Crowder Penberthy had been taken from her on Route 9, Maddie Crowder walked up the drive of the aviary at sunset. She was 27. She was in her final semester of law school. She still lived on the property, not in the main house, but in the gardener's cottage at the northeast corner of the grounds set back among the maples. The cottage had 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, a wood stove, a porch that faced the lake, and exactly the amount of room she needed. Lillian Whitcomb was 76. Lillian came over every Sunday. Tabitha Ainsworth was the chief of police of Hollowmere. She had been elected on a platform of one sentence, "I will not be paid by the bank." The sentence had been printed on every yard sign in the county. She had won by an absurd margin. She had a dog named Beauregard, which she had named deliberately so that she could yell the name across her yard at 6 in the morning and feel something close to peace. Constance Vail had won a Pulitzer in 2027 for her reporting on the case. She sat on the Foundation's board. Beauregard Ashcroft Jr. had died in federal prison at the age of 83, awaiting his second trial. Thaddeus Ashcroft III was at the time of writing serving the 5th year of an 11-year sentence in a minimum security facility in eastern Pennsylvania. The bonds, after extensive legal arbitration, had been split. Half had gone to the descendants of the 24 families documented in Imogen's ledger. The settlement had taken 3 years and had required the location of 271 living heirs across 38 states. The other half had gone by contract to the Crowder estate. The Crowder estate had immediately donated all of it to the foundation. Now Maddie walked through the front doors of the aviary. They were unlocked. The foundation closed at 6 on Saturdays, but Maddie had a key and there was no one inside. She crossed the conservatory. She stood under the dome. She looked up. The lights inside had been changed. They were now LED. They were warm. They turned on automatically at twilight. From the road, the dome glowed with the soft, gold-colored steadiness of a lantern. The cages caught the light, each one in its own small, clean glow. Each one held a name. The cages no longer felt like cages to her. They felt she had decided some time ago, like lamps. She walked to the rotunda. She stood in front of the ledger. She did not open it. She did not need to. She set on top of the museum glass a small bouquet. White asters. They had been her mother's favorite. She had not known that growing up. Lillian had told her 2 years after the broadcast on a Sunday afternoon in this very room. They had been sitting on a bench against the wall eating sandwiches from wax paper. Lillian had said very softly, "Your mother loved white asters. I should have told you sooner." Maddie had nodded. She had eaten her sandwich. She had not cried because she had stopped crying for a while around then. Crying had become briefly a thing that hurt other people more than it helped her. She had learned a different way to mourn. She had learned to carry asters. Now she set the asters on the glass. She set her hand on top of them just for a moment. She said very quietly, "Hi, Mama." The dome was very still. She said, "It's not done. It's never done. But the part you started, that part is done." She said, "I'm in law school. I think you would laugh at that." She said, "Lillian's good. She made cherry pie last week, the good kind. She put a lattice on it." She said, "Gran would have hated the LED lights. I had Ambrose pick the warmth. He picked the warmth she would have hated least. We compromised." She said, "I miss you." She said, "I will see you in everything I do for the rest of my life. I will see you in the women who come in here on a Tuesday with their hands shaking, who don't think anyone's going to listen to them. I will see you in the cages, all 316. I will see you in the asters." She said, "I am not afraid." She said, "I am still afraid, but I am not the kind of afraid you were. You were the kind of afraid that drove the car anyway. I am the kind of afraid that signs the papers and goes to class on Monday. You earned me that. You bought me that." She stood there for a long time. Outside, the wind moved across the lake. Inside, the cages glowed. Above the door where Maddie had had it carved into the lintel 2 years earlier, in small, even lettering, were 3 words. "Be loud, Maggie." She turned out the light. She walked home through the maples.